We can get started. All right. So today's meeting will be going over world building and creating a believable world in video games. I'm actually pretty excited about this topic because world building is one of my favorite things in storytelling and also in video games. So, so what is world building? Well, it's basically what it states. It's just creating a fictional world, and that can include settings, characters, culture, just anything that would revolve the world itself. So now you should ask, why should I even care about world building? I'm not even making a game that's super story heavy, so why should this matter? Well, world building isn't just involving the story necessarily. World building can definitely help when it comes to gameplay. So if, for example, your character needs to be set in a rainforest sort of setting, it'd be good to establish that maybe in this rainforest, waterfalls only fall during a certain period of time. So when you're playing the game, you would know that you can go underneath the waterfall during whatever time period when it isn't set. So you can implement it ways like that. But if you want to make your game more story heavy, it definitely helps to make your world feel more believable and alive because people aren't really going to care about your world if there isn't really a whole lot of info made about it. It also helps better understand the characters' motives for why they're doing the things that they're doing, and it can provide a lot more context for your story.
I should say really quickly, I don't know how many of you here were here last week for my video editing workshop, but one thing I said there is you want to hint at something, deeper that, get the players' imaginations going. So a lot of games have actually gotten really popular over just having small little background details to analyze and build interesting theories off of. So just leaving a few small details in there can really get people thinking about stuff, even if it's not anything too major.
Yeah, honestly, the more questions that you have the player ask, the better, to be honest. All right. So, some tips to creating your own world if you're interested in, of course, making your own world in your own video game. The setting. So, you can make your setting based off of our already existing world, an alternate version of our world, or you can make up an entirely different world in itself. So, for example, with Genshin Impact, it takes place in an entirely fictional world of Teviot, and this is one of the villages, Mondstadt. Usually, a lot of worlds that are created entirely fictional are inspired from already existing areas. For example, like I said, with Mondstadt, it's based off of like Western Europe specifically, and that can help you drive inspiration on how exactly you want to create your setting. But if you don't feel like doing all that, you can just have it set in the real world, or you can create an alternate version of it, like historical differences, or maybe in this version of our world, there are superhumans or different creatures, like with Pokemon. The environments that you do set your characters in can definitely affect their behaviors and, like I said, their motives or just things like that. So it can also be useful for gameplay as well. Like I said, with example, with if you live in an area with high mountains or cliffs, maybe you can have like a gliding section and have the character kind of glide through the mountains. And second point, the ecosystem.
Oh, they look so cute.
You can use existing species already, like I said, if you don't feel like doing all that extra work. But if you're interested in creating your own species, like I said with Pokemon, some tips for doing that is design them based on their environment. So I used an example of Vulpix from Pokemon. In Generation 6, they introduced the idea of regional variants, which I think is just a really cool idea. And with Alolan Vulpix, the one that's white, that Vulpix is, like I said, only found in Alola and is only found in icy areas, which is reflected by that with this design of being more like an ice-themed design. Another example of, another tip for creating a new species is, are they a predator or a prey species? If you study animals or anything like that, you know that predators and prey look different biologically. Generally, Predators, their eyes are kind of more set more towards their center. Of course, they have like sharp claws, teeth. And with prey, their eyes are more like set on the sides. They don't really have that many, I guess, dangerous characteristics, albeit, of course, with a few other exceptions. But
If you remember when we talked about shape theory earlier, here's a good place to put it into practice.
yes. And of course, you can also just combine real life animals to create new ones. I know, like, Avatar. I think of Avatar when I think of this, where they had, like, I think it was like,
Turtle ducks.
yeah, the turtle ducks and like,
Platypus bear.
yeah,
That sky bison.
yeah, the sky bison and
I'm
the
sure it was like a caterpillar and a bison.
something.
Something bison.
We had that ostrich thing that was basically a horse.
Yes. So you can just do that, where you just combine different animals together to create new ones, or you can reference real life animals to create your new species, which generally that's what a lot of monster designers do. The rules and power structure. This part is my favorite because you can do a whole lot with this. The rules, you need to establish your rules for your world. And without said rules, it can be very hard to understand your world, and it can also start building inconsistencies. So if in your world there's like certain people can fly, you have to like really establish that, because if you're like playing the game and you're just like seeing people fly and you're like, why can't I fly? And you have to really establish that. So there could be like a species that are only able to fly, or maybe you have to have a certain amount of magic abilities to do that. Just set your ground rules about that. Or maybe in this world, for example, like when it's nighttime, people are turned into monsters. You have to kind of make that ground rule as well. And also, if you have a power system in your world, what exactly is it? You have to kind of provide some details about what the power system is. There is a difference between like hard magic and soft magic, which you kind of explained a little bit when you were talking about Shadow Colossus with like soft details and hard details. Specifically when it comes to like hard magic and soft magic, hard magic is just going into explicit detail about what exactly your magic system is. And soft magic is more so just kind of a loose end of that. There isn't too many hard ground rules about it. Hard magic is kind of more associated with more serious/darker tones, while soft magic is more associated with a lighter tone. So if you want to figure out the tone of your series, if you have some sort of power system, this can be a good way of establishing that. So the next thing is your history and your lore. I think this is probably the most important part of your world building, or your world as well. If you can't really explain exactly like the origins of your world, especially if it's a very story heavy game, it's going to be a little confusing about like why exactly your character is doing the things that it's doing. So you don't need to like go into like the complete origin story about how like the earth was created or something like that. You can just go into like this magic was created from this 1,000 years ago, and now everyone has magic. It can be kind of just like that type of origin story. I say be very careful with explaining your history, because especially if you have a whole like book explaining about the origins of your story, can be a little much, and too much exposition can get a little overwhelming. So try to reveal your details about it gradually. Some ways to do that is like have NPCs or characters kind of give a little bit of detail about the history of it, or like how in Pokemon, how there's a library where you can actually go in and look at it yourself. Of course, this is all optional so that the player can like learn more about the history themselves, instead of like info dumping a bunch of information to you.
One last thing I would like to say about this is it's a bit tangential to actually building your world, but when you do build your world, make sure to stand by it. It can be tempting, especially if you're new to it and you rely on a lot of genre tropes and stuff, to poke fun like, wow, isn't this world, uninspired? Or wow, look, my dungeon game uses a slime. Isn't that incredible? But don't do that. As he said to me before, this started, save the self-deprecation for the developer commentary. Just stand by our world. Even if it does have, basic creature stuff, focus on the things that make it cool or interesting. Because when you stand by your game, by your world, by your characters, it's a lot easier for people to stand with you than if you just take out a revolver and shoot it in the kneecaps before people can even see it fully. So, stand by what you make.
Yes.
Are you saying like stick with it and finish it?
I mean, like when you're showing it and presenting it to other people, don't make jokes at your own game or world's expense.
Yeah.
Be confident about it.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's exactly.
Okay.
There is a way to like do that without like being too self-deprecating, of course. But especially if it's like your first game, I kind of would avoid doing that.
Yeah, because oh, sorry.
If you treat
Okay, I was gonna say because like even if you have like a comedic setting or something that like having like seriousness is not the same as playing something straight. Like you can have a setting that's very like unusual or where characters make amusing decisions or where the world just doesn't really make sense, but you can still play it straight and without trying to jab at the fact that this is so not realistic.
having your characters make jokes is not the same as having jokes at the expense of your characters.
Yes.
The culture and civilization. So if your game has a dominant species in it, it's good to establish the type of culture that the species, if they're like sentient, like humans, it's good to establish the type of culture that they live in. So I use an example of the Banuk people from Horizon Zero Dawn. So generally with cultures, when you want to create your own fictional culture, a lot of the times people, take inspiration from already existing cultures. I mean, generally you kind of have to start from somewhere, but also I'd avoid like doing generalizations and stereotypes, especially if you want to take your inspiration from like indigenous cultures or like already marginalized cultures, because generally, especially with people taking inspiration from indigenous cultures, there's like a theme of people making them out to be like savages, which isn't, good. So try to like steer away from doing stereotypes with them. So if they're based off of people from Africa, maybe like not try to like make it all like tribal. And so from all those tips, you can build up your own story. So use your world as a launch pad for creating your story. Creating a story is not easy. It can definitely take a long time. It can take years for people to establish their story. And I think a lot of times it's because they haven't established their world. And if you haven't established your world, it's going to be hard to really have somewhere to start off from. So ways to do that is, does the society and or setting of your character that their characters are placed in, does it affect their motives at all? So if they live in a world, if it's like a post-dystopian society and they want to go and stop the bad guy from, taking over the world from this dystopian society, it gives the player a better reason. Okay, I understand why this character wants to do that. This society kind of sucks. Let's try to stop it. Or maybe in this culture, everyone has to stay the same. So, and then your character is the oddball out, and they want to create a world in which everyone's different. So, with your fully established world, you can use that as the way to build up the main conflict for your story. And honestly, that's kind of all I have. Like said, world building in itself, it may seem like super complex, but it actually really isn't all that in depth when you think about it. Like I said, you just got to come up with the setting for your world. You have to come up with your characters based off of the setting, your ecosystem, all that. Once you got that hand down, you'll be able to create your world and build off from that.